Popper says it's a methodological principle. People act rationally. And it has little empirical content. Now that's strange, because if it's a methodological principle, it doesn't have any empirical content. It's false, moreover. But it's a good approximation to the truth. And despite its falsehood, it must not be rejected. This is Popper talking, who says if you have a false theory, you ought to reject it. Or replace by principles which is closer to the truth. Hopeless, total chaos. A total hopeless confusion. Poor Popper, who had given the idea of falsification to Hayek. And then Hayek did something with it. And Popper took that over and created a complete disaster. Fortunately, it's not so disastrous, because as has been shown, particularly by Moretta Kurtke, you can remedy Popper's rationality principle by considering it as an idealization that may be factualized in a number of steps. But Hayek is not without his problems either. And all his problems, not all his problems, let's say, his most serious problems come out of the fact that his philosophy of science is a direct translation of his theory of mind to the field of methodology. Which means, if we use Popper's terms, that for Hayek, knowledge is a world two phenomenon. It's created by our brain. Our brain, which creates subjective impression, and it cannot get beyond that. Our brain, world one, the physical structure of the brain, which creates subjective impressions, consciousness, knowledge of the world, but only subjective. Whereas for Popper, knowledge, as is well known, consists out of the interaction of our subjective ideas with the world of contents, of ideas, of theories, of books, etc., etc. For Hayek, the brain is more or less passive. Well, it processes sense impressions, but let's say it's much more passive than what, according to Popper, goes on when we acquire knowledge. We must intervene actively. We must do something. Touch reality. Ooh, must information. I can't do that in the little time that I have. Okay, and so what is the problem? The problem manifests itself also in Hayek's very ambiguous attitude with respect to our ability to intervene in reality. Because on the one hand he says individuals in society have very limited knowledge, so they should not meddle with the organization of society because they risk destroying the wisdom of ages that has been sedimented in institutions. On the other hand, Hayek, as a social scientist, somehow acquired the knowledge about the structure of society, which gave him the, gave him a ticket to telling people what they ought and ought not to do. That is very, very inconsistent, and you can see that Hayek himself is very confused about it, because there are publications in which he says, no, don't touch it, tradition is sacred. And other publications in which he leads himself to believe that he is a critical rationalist. And in one of his articles he says, the prime example of my theory of society, of what we can and cannot do in society, is Karl Popper and his critical rationalism. Now that's hard to believe. Now, an example of, let's say, his lack of capability to decide whether we can or cannot interfere in social processes is what he does in Monetary Nationalism, which I asked Federico to make available to you, which is, I wrote a paper about his book on monetary nationalism. I see that we have 5 minutes left, but if there are some questions about that paper, I'm willing to answer them. So, where do all the differences between Popper and Hayek come from? They come from the different stances they take with respect to David Hume. Hume, who is well known for, let's say, two versions of empiricism. On the one hand, his anti-inductivism, his argument that logically induction doesn't exist, it can't work, but He believes also in the power of observations. Now, Popper takes his anti-inductivism, whereas Hayek follows the observational aspect, let's say the road that departs from Hume. Hume, conservative. Hayek adopts that. I think the title of the last chapter of Constitution of Liberty, Why I'm Not a Conservative, is what Americans say is a misnomer. It's obvious, Hayek is a conservative. And of course, Hume is also a skeptic. Now, Popper takes the more skeptical road. He is not willing to accept, let's say, the value of tradition. He wants to investigate. The human mind, says Popper, is capable of criticizing traditions, and Hayek is very wary of that. Which raises the question, didn't they know that they disagreed? Well, about the sensory order is obvious, because Popper writes to Hayek that he doesn't like them. But how about the rest of the differences? One answer is, yes, about some differences they are aware that they have them. Another answer is, they're not aware about other differences, particularly on the Hayek's part. Why? Because they are, well, I don't say caught in their own research programs, but they have their internal dynamics, and it's not always possible to take the necessary distance to notice that there are differences with the ideas of the friend, of the other. Popper says, nobody is an authority on his own ideas, and this is a nice illustration of that principle. Now, in a way, I've been thinking about this. It's a variant of the fallacy of affirming the consequent. What do I mean by that? You have the manuscript of the Sensory Order, 1920. Out of that came the counter-revolution of science, the facts of the social sciences, and also Popper, in his Poverty of Historicism and in his Open Society, emphasizes the importance of taking people's ideas seriously in social scientific explanations. And so, let's say, subjectivism, to use the Austrian term, you find that also in Popper's Open Society, in the Poverty. Now, Hayek notices these similarities, and well, I'm exaggerating a bit, but you get this. This is the fallacy of affirming the concept. If P, then Q. Q, therefore P. That's a logical fallacy. Now, something like that might be read into what Hayek may have done. He says, listen, Popper and I agree on this. My ideas come from here, therefore Popper agrees with us. Okay? Now let's... Why has my presentation stopped? Oh, that's confusion. It comes out of using two computers. Now, the third answer, which has also been given by Jeremy Shearer yesterday, is they don't disagree with each other in public. Why? Because they feel they stand for the open society, the free society, against obscurantism, against relativism, against constructivism, against all sorts of bad things, and they don't want to weaken their case by saying in public that the other one has got things wrong. Now, I show you some letters. This is Hayek in 1964, so he was 66 years old, and he writes triumphantly, "Dear Carl, it has struck me tonight that the most appropriate name for our philosophy, as if it were homogeneous, is really negativism. You have shown that all science can do is to tell us what will not happen. I'm on the point of showing, as Kant did before, that all justice can tell us is what we must not do. In fact, since all our knowledge must be abstract, it can tell us only what is not permissible or narrow the range of the possible," which is the argument of his publications on explanations in principle and theory of complex phenomena. The only test we have for accepting what we believe in is that it does not contradict other things we also believe in. And it's of course the insight into the necessary limitations of our knowledge, another important theme, which restricts us to the negative and binds us to respect other men with equally limited but different knowledge, etc. Es lebe der negativism. Long live negativism. And Popper replies to that. He says, "Dear Fritz," because Hayek, years before, has given him the permission to call him Fritz, which in the German-speaking world is a very important thing. And you know someone, and the man or the woman who is higher in rank at a certain point says, "Well, now you can call me by my first name." Now, there's an example of that in a different context. Somebody, when Mitterrand was president of France, somebody who thought he was a good friend of Mitterrand asked Mr. Mitterrand, "Puis-je te tutoyer? Can I say tu?" So the colloquial address form. And Mitterrand replied, "Si vous voulez." If you, polite form, want to. Okay, so Hayek reacts to that, saying it's a bit too long to read the whole letter, but I can have this put on the website. He says, well, negativism, content-wise, is okay, but we should not use that word. And so that's a sort of wrong thing. Now, the last letter, then I'll shut up. The last letter that I'm going to show to you is dates from about 15 years later. And why do I show it? To emphasize the fact that at least Hayek was convinced that he and Popper stood for a common cause. It's a letter to Ronald Reagan, just after the disaster that was created by Carter, who sent helicopters to free the American hostages in Iran, which led to his non-re-election, and Reagan had just been elected president. So Hayek writes to Reagan saying, "Sir, about 3 weeks ago I ventured to send to you through the American embassy at," it's a bit of a bad copy, "the following cable. Please stress that a government that has broken the oldest rule of the Comity of Nations has placed itself outside international law. I have since had occasion for a long discussion of this extremely important problem with my old friend, the philosopher Sir Karl Popper. And he has asked me, in our joint names, to urge on you the only peaceful solution which we could find for this highly dangerous and for the future of the peace of the world extremely important problem. Submit the whole issue to the International Court at The Hague. This would seem to satisfy all the crucial requirements, take prompt, blah blah blah, etc., etc. With profound respect, your obedient servant, Professor F.A. Hayek, F.B.A." So, I think what Jeremy said yesterday, and what I surmise, goes a long way towards explaining why Popper and Hayek never criticized each other in public. Or you have to read between the lines, as I have done with the article, Popper's article, A Rational Approach towards a rational theory of tradition. You have to read between the lines, which very few people do. It takes a bit more of an effort, but in the end you learn more and it's more fun. Thank you.